And we're back.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. So after these technical issues, we're finally back on stream. So let's go back to your screen and let's see what we can do now.
Yay, it's
Okay,
working.
we're live again. So, okay,
Cool.
you tell me.
Yes, so here I have our mind map that we are building, and we just talked about starting with maybe listing some references of good examples of design systems in general. And we could even categorize these references for like it's a good just library or it's a good documentation website. There's like many aspects of design system that some do better than others, right? And sometimes also just let me see what else can be a good reference, or just like beautiful components.
Mm,
For now, I'll just
yeah,
leave
or
these
maybe
two.
yeah, I don't know, maybe some demos or something like that. Um,
Yeah, flexibility, like they're good references for flexibility on
yeah.
demos and live playing around with the design system kind of thing.
Mm.
So we just mentioned, and then maybe I'll just create like different um, post-its for each one of these examples, references that we use. So, and the reason why I want to have now two tabs showing here is that we can navigate through these websites to take a look at what they do well,
Mm.
and how can that be used as inspiration for people defining their own design system, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we mentioned material, right? Because one of our Advent of Code feature that we released recently was MUI based starter kit in Backlight. And I was under the impression that MUI was material, but as it turns out, MUI is actually just inspired by material.
That's it
Um,
exactly. Just based on material design, but as a side project. I'm curious about, is there some implementation or same one or another framework like, let's say, Vue.js?
hmm, is it Vue.js?
Yeah,
Let's see.
yeah. We've got Vue material. Um, that
Okay.
seems to be
So basically, the
basically same.
common
Yeah,
thing.
same concept.
View material. Is it? Do they have a website for it?
Yeah. Um,
Beautify, of course.
and yeah.
Interesting. So basically, yeah, I would say for designers, material design is a great reference. Like we always end up coming to material design as a source of information for, especially design guidelines on best practices for each component.
Mhm.
And so, actually, I would like to know from you, what do you understand as documentation of design system?
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
is documentation for you?
From a developer perspective, I guess best documentation we could find is the one that is helping us to understand um, what are the tokens are related to, and because it will lead to how we could use those different tokens and those use variables directly into our implementation. So there is a saying from the Lightning React design system, um, which is uh, which is maintained by um, the Salesforce team.
Mm,
And I think that is interesting with this design system is that the Lightning design system is clearing in its documentation really a lot of different tokens, and it's it's complex to understand and complex to just figure out how those mass of design tokens, because there's I don't know, hundreds of them in the whole design system. So how could you use it? Where are they really used in the final implementation? How could I rely on it? How could I override them? So yeah, I think a good design system documentation is the one that is just um, take you by hand and bring you all over the different part of the design system, digging more and more in the different kind of components and their variations. Because otherwise,
Interesting.
we're often lost. You know, this is always the same thing. You're just in front of a big library, and you don't know what to pick at first. So
And so, where would you find those things here? You mean the design token specifically part of Lightning is quite interesting.
yeah, because it's split in the. It's interesting because this is definitely not beginning of the documentation. They start with a old getting started, which is not really starting guide, but more if you're a developer or if you're a designer,
Hmm.
look at those part of those parts of the document. That's all. And the design tokens are really coming at the end of the documentation, like an annex of the documentation, like if it's not really useful in it, but it's definitely the cornerstone of the design system.
Hmm.
So I find it a bit strange to have them really at the bottom of the document.
Okay. So the getting started is not exactly how to get started with the design system, but
Yeah,
more um, the persona that is using, right? But more guiding the persona. Yeah, that's definitely a pattern that we see in pretty much all of the design systems documentation websites, like the biggest out there. Let's say when you go to material, they also give an introduction, and they don't specify like these introduction topics are for developers or designers. It's just like an overall concept of the material.
mm,
Um, and let's say then if you go inside color, the color system, it seems that they do it a little bit more mixed, right? These principles are documented, but do you think as a developer you would even want to read that you
mm.
have a baseline theme and
I'm
you know
I'm
it has primary secondary colors? Do you care about that?
I'm not that sure because I guess when you are starting to implementing the design system in the code, finally you don't care what are the primary colors or the secondary colors. You know that there are colors and that's all. Finally, primary or secondary or whatever the variation are um, under the responsibility of the design team, probably not the development team. Developers won't update himself the color because it finally, oh, this is not grayish enough, or oh, I don't like this really yellow one, you know. So there are just containers for some values, and we know that this container is dedicated to a color, and that's all. And finally, being a large reference and the large documentation explaining which color is the best one. This is not our primary interest, developers, in the development phase.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so, for example, having this kind of sentence, a primary color is the color displayed most frequently across your app screens and components, you probably wouldn't even care that it's written.
Yeah, or I guess could be interesting, but probably as a reference, like I don't know. Let's say we have a documentation for colors design token. Get access to the different variations, so we see them in a board, and we could have a reference section in this one explaining, yes, the primary color is the most used color in your final implementation. Just because I guess it's useful when you're working on I don't know a new variation of a button. Ooh, what an example! And finally, you know, your design team is not able to help you to implement this new variation because there is only one designer for 20 developers, and you don't have enough time to work with everyone. So um, so suddenly the developer will have the responsibility to implement a new variation or just to start it or to bootstrap it. So um, in this context, it's probably useful to just to know, okay, I have to use the primary color because this is the expected one in the overall context of it. But this is really for specific use cases and probably not um, common use cases of implementing the design system.
Right.
Yes, so.
Yeah, because I can tell you from a designer's perspective, we do spend quite some time to come up with all these concepts and outline them and write them well in order to publish in some kind of website that we hope other colleagues will eventually read,
Hmm,
right? But I guess yes, for designers, they will definitely have to read it. It should be sort of like a mandatory onboarding on like you're assigned a task of design.
mhm,
Make sure that you read our guidelines and concepts of the design system there, so that you can make the choices for your UI, better way. So you wouldn't have to think twice. Should this be a primary color, secondary color? Because you know that
hmm.
primary is used for X, secondary is used for Y. But I guess it's a bit of an evangelizing thing to encourage everybody to read and consume this documentation more, right? Not
Yeah.
just for when you're applying it or like having to code, but that you actually just out of interest read it, I would say.
Where are you putting your documentation? Where is the design team um, about which
That's
tool
a
do you
great
use?
question. Yeah. So, for example, before when I worked in other design system teams, we would start out writing this documentation somewhere where it was easy for us to write it. So it could be like a Google Docs, for example. But eventually, if it's in Google Docs, you don't know how well it's updated, or it's harder to find if you don't know the proper structure. So you could possibly build the guidelines in a Figma file, for example, because then it's
Mm,
at least attached with your library. But Figma is not really for documenting, or at least it's not like a CMS service, right? So you would have to come up with a template on how this documentation should look like, and maintain that template in order to be consistent as well, which, as you can imagine, it could turn out messy. So eventually, I think as a design system team, you would agree to publish and like just write and upload this documentation somewhere neutral, hence a website for your design system.
mm.
But yeah, which one comes first, right? Does the website come first? Does the documentation come first? Do the
Yeah,
design libraries come first? Or do the coded components come
yeah,
first?
exactly, exactly. I had an interesting conversation earlier this day with Brittany Posma, which is she's evangelizing for the child community, and especially on the design system. And she had exactly the same concerns about what is coming first. Is it the code? Is it the design? Is it the implementation? An interesting approach with Backlight is that finally we are trying to put everything together at the same time. We are trying to work on the code at the same time we are writing the documentation. At the same time, we're adding some stories, some tests, adding some things to designs files. So probably we don't have to. We should not see the overall design system project as a series of steps, probably more as
Mm,
an organic evolution of something that will be big at some point, but that have to start small and just saying, okay, see the demos that George is doing. He
Mm.
always starting by saying, okay, we had a session last Tuesday. We started a new starter kit based on open props,
Yeah.
and in 45 minutes, we just implemented a small amount of documentation by adding some tokens, colors token, fonts related tokens, space, and adding documentation for them just to have
Right.
rendering process of the different values and the different properties available. And after that, we will be able for the next session to start to craft maybe new components like that. But finally, a process that you are just um, continuously improving by just adding new component, adding new elements in your documentation, finally editing your components, re-editing your documentation, and so on.
Yeah. No, I do like this idea that a design system in general, not just the documentation part, it's not necessarily a step by step process. Like first you do this, then that, then that, then that. It's a continuous and organic, yeah, flow
Mm,
of things to do.
yeah.
And so, do you think that for these people that built like Lightning design system, material design, like we just see the end product of what they have here in their websites, right? Do you think that like the content that is in this website is constantly being updated? It's constantly being worked on?
I've, I'm really not sure. Um, Seems to be, but this is always the same thing when you are building a dedicated website for your brand, or even if you use advanced tool like 08 to embed your documentation in it, and um, there is um, an amount of maintenance in it, and if you don't have enough time to properly maintain your document, it will progressively synchronize for the design, for the base, and so yeah, it's not that easy. This is one of the ideas behind Backlight, just having the
Hmm.
gathering every pieces of the design system together and have them in the
One
same
place,
place. Yeah,
updated all the time. Yeah.
yeah. But our recommendation slowly leading me to start thinking, um, we as designers and developers don't have the same use of the documentation. Finally, you are expecting things in your design system documentation that are not the ones we are expecting at first when we work on the development process. So how could we improve the way we present the documentation, both for developers and for designers, that could meet their own expectations, even if we're really not working on the same?
Yeah, I would say, or at least one way that we've tried to solve it before in previous teams that I was working on is having tabs within like a page of that
Mm-hmm.
component. So, for example, component blueprints here and then buttons with icons as an example. What we tried to do was to have like here a tab, this is for designers and this is for developers. So the developers side really just had like you import this tag and these are your APIs that you can use. And for designers, it was more like a button icon is used for when action is this and the colors are that, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
So here you can see with Lightning Design System as an example, they do an introduction and they do mention classes. So for example, the button itself should have the classes, and as a designer, like if I'm not familiar with CSS and just not interested, that doesn't tell me anything, right?
Yeah.
So it's more likely focused on developers, but as a designer, I do like the ability to see how this button reacts, these focus states, and how they look in the different devices, for example.
K-League is asking us for no tabs. Please, no tabs. Okay.
I know,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like displaying it the necessary information to, and of course we're
Yeah.
using the Lightning design system, Kalik, as a place to like point out a few things. I mean, I'm sure they had their own reasoning to like do tabs or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's true. He's got a point. Tabs is where content goes to die. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could argue against that, because if I'm a designer, I know which tab to click, and I don't care about the depth tab, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it wasn't a great solution, and that's also what you mentioned, that the content should be evolving, because at some point, maybe, yeah, we experiment with the users of this design system if it's like an internal company design system, that if you can track even the usage of your documentation website and see if people are clicking on that tab or not, like how interested are they in that content, then at least you can rethink and take away the tabs for that matter.
Okay,
but
okay, should we find an inspiration from the Diátaxis framework? You know this one?
which one?
It's a Diátaxis framework.
I don't think I know about that.
Diataxis.
Okay, well, you're gonna have to write it down.
Yeah,
because
I will pass you the link.
Yeah, it'll be easier. You can put it here on the
oh yeah,
yeah,
that's a good idea.
So it's a framework for documentation.
It's a framework for documentation, exactly. Diátaxis.fr for framework. This is the best use of the French extension, I guess. So with that, so in the Figma documentation, Diátaxis.fr.
I see the link. Oh. And let me open here on a tab. So, what about this framework?
So the idea behind the Diátaxis framework, when you are working on the documentation, so it applies well on technical documentation, but not only. The idea is to say you could split your documentation in 4 parts. The tutorials that are dedicated to replaying the same content each time, having the same result. So it's really a deterministic part of the documentation, just to help you to gather everything and to understand how does it work. You have how-to guides that are more dedicated to small parts of your documentation, dedicated to solve problems. I got a problem in this specific context, so how could I find a solution to it? We've got the explanations part that is dedicated to working on how does it work behind the hood. Why did we choose this part of this implementation or this technical framework, or why did we name that? And we've got the reference that are more that is most it's an exhaustive reference on everything related to a specific section, like I don't know, FAQ or things like that. What is it's interesting is that if you have a look at the tutorials and the how-to guides, they are dedicated to practical aspects of your use.
Yeah.
But the tutorials and the explanation serves to explain why you are going on this side specifically, and what lead us to this specific context and this specific. And same thing, if you've got how-tos and references, this is most dedicated to how do I work with that, and how could I in this specific context I know that because I'm working with React, I need to import those and those and those dependencies. So the reference part of the documentation will help me to understand why these dependencies are necessary and how I need to use. So there is different side of the documentation, and trying to figure out which part of the documentation is the best to reply to your issue at some point
Mm.
will help you to organize it. And my idea behind this is, could we deploy the Diátaxis framework to probably structure better our documentation for designers, developers in the design? Because I I bet that the developer side is probably more on the practical section, whereas
Mm.
the design side is more on the theoretical knowledge section, in
For
between
example.
explanation and references.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. But how do you see this being applied in a website itself? Would you have like this sort of four main groups in a sort of a sidebar that then that's how people would guide themselves to find the information?
Tabs.
No, no tax.
No, but yet maybe we could finally, in our different documentation pages, provide templates and layouts for all those different sections, and each time you are adding a new section in your documentation, I mean, I'm working on once again a button, and I want to document this button, so I will add some part into the and I have to pick the right section in my layout to put this. After
Right.
that, we could find a different way to present it. Maybe it's just a single flow. Maybe it's a two column collapsible sections. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if we
Fair
are
enough.
able to at start just organize in different sections in a global template for each page of documentation, um, maybe it will be better or easier to maintain and contribute, because the playgrounds of a component definitely dedicated to the tutorial section,
Mm.
whereas rendering of the different variations of colors are will probably fit better in the reference, because we need to access all this reference of the different parts, the different sections of the colors. And the
Yeah.
explanation part could host the design explanation of this specific use of colors.
Yeah. No, and I like their description as well because they also in their website themselves try to guide you to how would you do tutorials.
Hmm.
Because yeah, indeed, it kind of makes sense to like if you're gonna explain how to achieve a certain result with the implementation of these components in a lesson form, probably would work the best, or maybe just a step by step kind of
Mhm.
thing. Yeah, so that's kind of more the how-to guide, but the tutorial on like yeah, start using our design system, here's a lesson. And yeah, I think if I had seen this framework before, it would have helped a lot with at least assigning tasks to other designers that were contributing to the design system, because everybody comes with the same question. Okay, what do you need me to write and where do I start? And of course, if we're making a new component, we basically just define other like reference design systems that we have out there in the world as a place to start, right? So we would do exactly this. We would go into material design system, or let's see another one, the lightning design system. Um, a good one is the carbon as well.
Hmm.
Um, and we would say that like we are creating our own button. Oop, design system there. So I would come into material, check what they write about the button. Where is their button shape? Oh, it's hard to find these days. It was different before. Material guideline. Well, it's inside components. Sorry. Yeah, like every website does it differently. Sometimes they have the navigation on the top, on the left. This also causes a lot of confusion. But yeah, I would come here and see as a designer, like now I'm contributing to the design system team. Oh, look, tabs. And I would say, okay, they have a usage topic, they have a principles topic, a type, anatomy, and other, well, here, all the content you can see.
Hmm.
So I would ask the collaborators to our new component, like, hey, maybe let's base it on this frame here that they use. But wait, let's check other websites to see how they do.
Hmm.
Carbon design system, components, and then let's see, button is a great example, isn't it? They separate in usage, style, code, and accessibility. So they have a whole tab for accessibility. I'm having a lot of fun finding a lot of tabs in the basic, in the classic design systems out there. They have an overview, and then they have live demos. So anatomy is something that everybody has. So maybe we should have an anatomy in our own as well. And oh, you can see it's a lot of content. So somebody spent a lot of time to write all this.
Yeah.
And then let's see, in the Lightning design system, do they have just a button without icons? Just like here. See, I would expect button to be on top, not to start with button groups and button icons, but that's just me. And in essence, you would like investigate what the biggest and best design systems out there do, and then you would come up with your own version that makes sense to your own team and the way your designers and developers use your design system. Because maybe this is a lot of information and it's not really relevant for us to like even spend time writing this down just yet. I guess eventually if your design system becomes a public design system and you might want to like set out the best standards to anybody out there on how to use the design system that you think is the best because it's your own and you made it, then maybe you would come up with even more arguments or more topics to write down in that specific component. Another one that I like a lot is the orbit.qe. So I'm going to write this down. Orbit by QE. They recently just did a huge upgrade to their documentation website. So another, let's see what else they do here. Yes, design, React. So yeah, if I'm a developer, I would know that, you know, I'm developing in React and all the React information is in here. So that's what I would go for. And as a designer, then I would try to read it to see all the details, when to use, when not to use, do's and don'ts kind of thing. I think that's like one of the biggest, or it actually falls into your, in this framework, on the how-tos. Also, like, even though for designers is most likely not so much practical to a certain extent as it is for developers.
Yeah.
Still, I would say there is quite a lot of server work, documentation specific to designers as well. Hence the issue with having everything in one place, and then how do you cater like the do's and don'ts for developers and the do's and don'ts for designers, because designers will be having to read on like, should I put this button after a long form, or should I place this button on the left or on the right of my UI? Whilst for the developers, they will receive that design. They won't have to think of like, put it on the left or put it on the right. However, I would argue that it could be interesting for developers to know this information in case they have to come up with a UI without having a design, right? They would know exactly where to place the button if this documentation was accessible to them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And does it make sense for a design team to have to dive in this documentation in a platform like Backlight to stay up to date with how to use a design system?
I would say so, because in the end, the holy grail, and like, not to try to sound too marketing or promotion, but the thing is, we are working on a pretty cool platform, and the holy grail is to have everything in one place, right?
Yeah.
So that I wouldn't have to like direct my designers in one place and my developers in another, and then
Mm,
risking having this information out of alignment because things are being updated at different times.
mhm.
Definitely, I think all this and that's what these websites are trying to do as well, right? The problem with trying to do in a website like this is like the nightmare to implement all these little features of
Mm.
like
Yeah,
whoever is going
sure.
to write this documentation, where are they going to do it? Is this inside the CMS or not? Right. And that's why I would say, yeah, definitely that's what I really like about Backlight.
Yeah.
The fact
So,
that,
could we imagine a way to republish um, to the um, design software Figma or does it make sense to republish a link to the documentation like that what we are doing with the design feature in Backlight? Right now in Backlight, when you want to link design to a component or to block or something like that, we just have to add a figma.link file or a sketch.link file and putting
mm,
the URL in it, and you've got access directly in the preview tab to the design file embedded inside Backlight. Does it make sense to have the same kind of feature in Figma to have access to the documentation of the component in the design software? Does it?
definitely. I mean, one thing that we do when we are designing components in Figma is that you can add a description of that component,
Mhm.
and in that description you can add a link. And if you don't change the link, then whatever updates happen to that link, once if you access it through Figma, you will land on the same place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Okay.
I'm having issues there.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
I would say, like as an example, the documentation that writes down like the guidelines for how to use that button, the do's and don'ts, needs to be written, or I need to be able to tell my designers to write this somewhere where it's easy for them to write. So that's why Google Docs is easy. Everybody
Mm.
knows how to use Google Docs. Or if you have a WordPress installation, I know how to make a new blog post. And so whatever is displayed for the public, if there is a back end to input this information on, then it needs to be easy for the designers to do so, right? If the designers have to like write a markdown file or like make a PR in a repo to update this documentation, the do's and don'ts for designers, you will lose them. Like maybe the most geek ones that will, be happy to do it, but like I don't know percentage wise, but let's say 60%
Yeah.
will not be so happy to do so. And so I guess one requirement for where does this live for designers, I don't think they really mind where it lives. If I can access it, like if I have a link in Figma that it takes me to this page easily, great. Now, how is this page updated? That's the question,
Mm-hmm.
right? It needs to be updated by designers. So if it's written in an easy platform that I can, make my like backlight, that I can make my write my documentation and update it. And if the link doesn't change of where that thing lives, then there's nothing to push to Figma as such, basically answering your question. But if it is a link that needs to be like, if you want to make it specific to a branch, then I guess that's an idea for an interesting plugin.
Yeah.
Something that is like, something changed in your documentation, and then it pushes a notification to the Figma file.
Hmm. Nice.
Something like that could be
Yeah.
interesting.
Could be interesting.
Because if it's an immutable link, so like a fixed link, and things get updated in there, also nothing's going to trigger the designer to just check this link every now and then, right?
Hmm.
Because why would you?
Yeah, of course. But if you have a
So yeah.
notification saying, "Hey, documentation was updated," you
Mm,
yeah be tempted to just have a look at it, saying what
yeah.
has changed, if everything is still in place, still working. It it suggests that you have to review it.
Yeah.
Okay, if we are able to couple that with a way to live edit documentation in previews, so having a kind of WYSIWYG editor related to just easily put content, don't having to worry, even with a markdown syntax, just writing. Okay, be really nice.
Yeah.
Be
No,
really nice.
I do see the value in that. And I guess with a platform in which you do like everything, you code the components, you reference the designs, and you write the documentation on it. You're solving a big issue that every design system team starts with, which is okay, now we have all this content. Where do we put it? Right, because the devs will have their repo, the designers will have their design files, and there's this missing piece that tend to be, or like it tends to end up in being a website,
Mhm.
like hosted somewhere with a URL. And if sometimes, like, if it's a design system from a big brand that does not want it to be public, then it will just live behind like some security, that you need a login from that company to be able to see the contents of that website. um, but yeah, like trying to do a website that serves both designers and developers means you need to be able to put live examples, right? So you need to embed code and like be able to test these live examples. And that's where like having a CMS doesn't
Yeah,
suit design system teams. Like
yeah,
WordPress
definitely.
does not work.
Of course, you've got you've got access to only a limited number of features, allowing you
Yeah.
to write content, but you're not embedding dynamic content and playground.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because things like this, like the attributes, normally is just extracted from the code base
Mm-hmm.
anyway. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is nobody building this table and like writing down the every single attribute.
Yeah.
Like this is just generated automatically. Hence, having a website that does all that um, um, grabbing of information for you is also what a lot of design system teams spend time on. So yeah,
Yeah.
you definitely want something that is easy, that when a component is created, all these attributes are defined, and then it's pushed to a live documentation website straight
Mm.
away.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
maybe we could imagine a feature where designers could contribute content with nations and use cases and so on, and flag some sections saying, okay, here we need to embed the component and we need to have a playground, or you need to have properties in this. But this is not my responsibility as a designer. I just
Aha.
flag the section asking for the developers to embed the component and the playground and at, in this section, which could improve the way we are trying to put the responsibility on the right shoulders.
That is a fair point. But that is if you want to make like the content of this page sort of universal, that
Mm.
anybody reading it, or that it would be useful to everybody. I still like the suggestion on the dia-
Yeah,
diataxis
Diátaxis.
diataxis
Don't ask me why.
quadrant. um, because with this you at least could outline a universal documentation that sort of goes or covers these things, or how to find the information that you're looking for. But definitely there will be a point where the designer is like, I don't know if you like, do you need to outline the attributes here or there? Like the developers will also have to take some kind of ownership on how to communicate to their future colleagues who will be
Mm.
using these components on what's the best way to keep this information updated, that others developers can access it and understand it well. And with that we also have the issue of um, you want documentation to be generated automatically based on the capabilities of that component, but there's a lot of options that is just like, hey, if you do x plus y, you're gonna get this result, and if you do x plus z, you're gonna get that result. That not necessarily gets like you don't extract that from manual. You need somebody to
Mm-hmm.
like how to guidelines
Yeah,
for
yeah, of course.
making a component. And yeah, I would say in the end it's kind of essential to have a design system team to think of all these scenarios and all the needs from other developers, to and have the team be the ones like promoting or like coming up with this documentation. Getting started. So can you think of any other interesting design systems that you know of? That, like, I've noticed that you don't actually
Yeah.
mention like these big websites like I do. You think about libraries, right?
Yeah, you're right. What do we have in terms of libraries? The fact is, in terms of libraries, they are generally dedicated to a specific framework, so dedicated to React, but they are still re-implementing the same design
Mm-hmm.
system in the back. You see, it's
Right.
Chakra UI is dedicated to React and is give or take the same thing like material design. So it's another implementation of material design with another design system dedicated to React. But
Right.
in the end, this is still the same thing. So
So is there another one that you can think of that is like that is not material
that
basically?
is that.
Can you think of some that
Yeah,
is used as
yeah.
reference? Like,
If we stick to the Lightning design system, there is a specific implementation of Lightning design system for React that is named Lightning design system for React. Exactly that. So yeah, this is something we could do. Something that. So yeah.
okay, there, yeah. Um, but then of a generic design system like Lightning or like Material or Carbon, any others?
You mean a library that is not related to an existing design system?
No, or just a design system
Oh,
that you
just
can think is a good reference.
yeah. Yeah, we've got Polaris.
Oh yes, of course. My God, I forgot about Polaris. What else?
What else?
I'm gonna put an arrow from here to here.
Interesting thing is that we're still doing the same search, same request. Oh, Kelly is telling us that obviously the Lightning design system has several documentation sites, one per implementation, one for HTML, one for React, one for Lightning web components, which of course we support in web component.dev, one for Aura, and so on.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, there is a lot of nation variations
Implementations.
and
Yeah.
implementations.
So you would say different libraries for the Lightning design
Yeah,
system website.
finally implementing the same foundation of a design, different areas.
Technologies. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, let's put it this way: we have a homework
Yeah.
alongside our other homeworks that we haven't followed through,
Oh yeah.
which is to keep adding these references of good design systems. There are some as well that I got from the previous events that I hosted, some interesting references. But yeah, I think these are kind of the biggest ones in the market that I
Mm.
know of, that I can think of right now on top of my head. And they serve as a good base for like how should you document, how should you
Mm.
think about your components, how should you code your components. And of course we do have the WC3 design tokens initiative to kind of put a like mother of all frameworks on design tokens. Let's see how
Cool.
that's going to develop in the future. Cool. So we have
Okay,
some
that's
homework.
great.
Let's look into filling up some of these blank areas. And I think, yeah, for now, this should be, well, our little mind map is growing.
Yeah, have a lot of work on it, but interesting to gather all these and all those ideas because as a design system, it's just growing organically, getting bigger.
Definitely, yeah. It's becoming a universe on itself,
Yeah.
really.
Okay, nice. So
Cool.
that's all for today.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you as usual. Thank you for your time, and see you next week. I don't know which will be the
Yes.
next topic, but we have some days to find it.
Yeah.
We'll see
I
next
mean,
time.
we decided to cover more of documentation today, but we cannot see as it goes what fits best.
Okay,
Cool.
nice, cool.
Thanks,
So
Matthias.
thanks, Tace, and see you next time. See you next week for the next episode. Will you be here next week or not? Or
Yeah,
do you have
yeah,
some
I'm working
vacations?
next week.
Okay, cool. So see you next week. Okay,
See you next
perfect.
week.
Bye bye.
Bye.